My father was born in Mexico in Guanajuato in 1914. My mom was born in Gailton, Colorado, over here by Eaton in 1918. He was born in Leon, Guanajuato, and his mother brought him across the border at Juarez when he was 6 months old. They paid 2 cents, 2 American pennies to cross the border then in those days. So they migrated in from there into Oklahoma. From Oklahoma they went into Nebraska. They were around Lincoln and that area for a little bit, and then they moved into Kansas City, Kansas, where he grew up. My father only went to the 8th grade. My mother went to the 5th grade. My father worked in the roundhouses in the railroad at that time. He worked on the tracks and fixed the railroad cars and stuff like that. Somewhere in there, and they moved to Colorado. He was 16 years old, and him and his father were coming on a dirt road out in the country. His father's name was Victorio. Somebody hit him on a crossroad, and his father died. And my dad was driving the car at that time. He was about 38 years old when that happened. But him and my mom met, like in 1932, somewhere in there, and they got married. He was working in the farms out there around Gill. Had started hauling walnut from Kansas to Colorado, walnut lumber, and sell it over here. And then Mom and him met when she was born in 1918, and she grew up in the Gailton area, so consequently they met. She was fairly young, but she only went to the 5th grade. Her sister took her to school there in Gailton at the very beginning. A teacher asked her, what is your name? And she says, my name is Paz Gonzalez, for Paz, for the word peace. And the teacher says, oh, Marie, and changed her name to Marie. She got old enough to get Social Security. They could not find the papers why she was named Marie. And I never saw a birth certificate, what her original name was on there, but I had to go to the school and find the old school papers. She ended up being Paz Marie Rangel when she got married. And that's actually how they met. My first sister was born in 1936. After that, there was 12 kids in my family, 6 boys and 6 girls. While we were growing up, we went out on the farm, started working in the fields. My older brother and myself and my younger brother, Philip, the 3 of us worked out in the fields with my mom. She drove thin beats with us. My dad was working for the farmer, milking cows. I can remember him plowing the fields behind some big horses, Morgan horses, walking all day long with a plow, plowing the fields. He was a pretty good sized man and everything, and so he could handle that. And we started out there thinning beets and picking cucumbers and picking green beans and creating onions and planting onions and all that kind of stuff. I started out in the fields when I was 7 years old with Mom. Sugar beets, they planted in solid row, not single plants, because they didn't have a way to plant their seeds where they could, what they call hybrid planting, where they had just one seed that went in on a certain spot on the field. In those days, you had to have a short hoe to space the beets. And so a short hoe, you were on your knees or bending over all day long. And I remember my mom would take 2 rows and with a short hoe on her knees all day, and my brother Dave and my brother Phil would take 1 row each, and she was always behind us. You had to space the beets out. In those days they paid you by the ton, but the farmers wanted bigger beets. So consequently you spaced them apart, maybe 10 to 12 inches, so they grow bigger beet. When they went to start paying them for sugar content, they could grow a smaller beet because they have a lot of sugar in it. You could space them maybe 8 inches apart or even smaller. So you had to be careful not to take everything off. You took a nice swat at the row, a couple of plants together, then you pulled them out by hand so you could only leave 1 plant on the ground so they would grow. And so that's the way we learned to thin beets. And then in the fall we'd top beets. We used to pick the green beans. They used to pay us by the pound, and we'd fill up buckets and then put them in a gunny sack and take them to the end of the field. Brother Dave and I, my sister Eugenia, my brother Phil, there was 4 of us. But green beans, you put them in the sack and then you take them and they weigh them for you, and they pay you right there how much it weighed by the pound. Usually if we worked a 12-hour day, the 4 of us, that was like 48 man hours, we'd take home about $8 or $9 for the day. I mean, that's how they paid you, They didn't pay a whole lot. The money was never in our pocket. Once we got paid, it always went to Mom. Even all the way through high school, we ended up working in a grain elevator. My dad was a foreman of the Greeley Feed and Bean Company. That'd be over here on 6th Avenue and about 9th Street. And we didn't live far from there once we moved to town. I went to grade school in Lincoln School. It was an elementary school growing up. My brothers, all of us, all went to Lincoln, went to Meeker, junior high school, and then from Meeker we went to Central High School, or Greeley High School then. All my family, the ones that graduated from high school, we all graduated from Greeley High School. Oh, Wildcats from way back when. When my graduating class, we only had about 265. Latino population, Mexicanos, there were very few of us, probably no more than 10, 15 in my graduating class. I know it's well populated now with a lot of Latinos, but at that time it was very few. When I was growing up in Greeley, once we moved to town, Greeley was only, my senior year in high school, I think I remember Greeley's population was only between 18 and 20,000 people. When I went to Colorado State College in fall of '58, there was only 3,800 kids on campus at that time. When I graduated in '62 with my bachelor's, there was 4,200 students on campus. So, you know, it had grown quite a bit. But, you know, growing up on the farm, we were pretty well isolated. And then once we moved to town, it was a matter of where you could find a good rental place. And my folks ended up buying a house on 7th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue. We all lived there. You know, when you have a big family, you learn to share. My mom used to say, if you don't get here in time for dinner, then you miss out. When we moved in from the farm, most of the people in the area were German, Russian ethnic groups, probably from World War I. Really nice people, most of them. Had immaculate lawns, and of course, for our neighborhood, you found the nicest dirt. There was no lawns. Growing up like that, you don't really know if you're being discriminated against. You don't even give that a thought. I think the only time we thought about that when growing up in the grade school, some kid, and usually it was a white kid, they had less than you did, but they wanted to make themselves feel good, so they would call you a dirty Mexican or something like that, you know. And I can still remember this one boy at Lincoln School. We'd play marbles, and he never had any. When the bell would ring, he would run out there and grab the marbles and take off running. And at that time, I'd be hollering at him, and he'd call me a dirty Mexican. So I didn't do anything. But I waited till the next day when I saw him, and he was going to do the same thing. He'd come over, and sure enough, he's going to grab the marbles. And then I'd beat him up. And then he'd go tell the teacher or the principal. And every day, they'd call me in. How come you beat up so-and-so? And I said, well, you know, he called me a dirty Mexican, and I didn't like that, so I beat him up. My mom used to say, you can have worn-out jeans with holes in them, and I patch them up. You can wear used clothes, but you don't have to be dirty with them. She was always taking care of the 12 kids. And it's interesting when you grow up in a big familia like that. I can remember when we lived out in the drylands. We were little kids, and we're out there. The 4 oldest boys, my brother David, me, my brother Phil, and my brother Frank, all we had was a mattress on the floor in one little tiny room. We'd sleep on that mattress crossways, you know, because that's what you had. But it was interesting that we were always hoping that one of us didn't have an accident and wake up wet in the morning. Teased them, or they teased me, and I used to tease them, and I even told my kids, my own boys, and oh yeah, I finally toilet trained myself when I was in the 10th grade. You know, it was interesting. But out there at Lincoln School, I met this, one of my coaches, a guy named Rudy Merrick, and he was my coach in the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. But he says, have you ever played football? And I said, no, I don't even know what that is. And it was interesting. He told me, you know what? I'm going to teach you how to play football. And I'm going to teach you how to be a center. And when you go to junior high, if I'm coaching up there, you're going to play football for me, and you're going to be a center. And then you're going to go to high school, and you're going to be a center. Then you're going to go to college, and you're going to be a center. And when you get that in college, you're going to be an All-American. I can always remember that. I didn't know what that all meant, but I knew he had told me he was going to be a center. And of course, finding out he was a center when he played at Colorado State College of Education then. And so he played ball there, and that's what he taught me, to be a center. So I actually played center for Lincoln. And we played tackle football in those days in grade school. We wore just shoulder pads and a helmet, no pads and no football pants or anything like that. You just blue jeans and a pair of tennis shoes. We used to play the other elementary schools in town. There was only 5 elementary schools in Greeley at that time. Lincoln, there was Park Washington, which is now Billy Martinez. I taught at Park Washington when I started the first teaching job. In 1962, I taught physical education there. Taught kindergarten through 6th graders, physical ed. And there was Cameron School, that's 3. There was Arlington, it's over here by the campus where the student center is, behind in that area. It's a student housing area there now. That was an elementary school there. There was those 4 that I can remember. We would practice about 3 nights after school, but very little because once the football season started, it wasn't bad. But my brothers and I, we had to go work in the fields and then Thin Beach in the fall. The last place we lived at in the farm was a guy named Dan Ditter. We were by the Greeley Airport, and we were going to Lincoln School, get out of school at 3 o'clock. And we went to school at 9, and my dad was working the grain elevator, and he'd drop us off there at the elevator, and we'd stay in the hay shed that was right there by the elevator until it was time for us to walk to school at 9 o'clock. He had to go work at 7, so we'd go to work with him. And after school, that school was out at 3, and my mom said, you make sure you're home by 3:30. We always had to hurry to get out of school because we walked from Lincoln School past the airport. Brother Dave and I, my brother Phil. And my brother Phil was always walking real slow because he observed everything. And we used to say, Philip, hurry up. We're going to be late. Your mom's going to holler at us. Oh, okay. And he'd pick up and throw a rock here and look over there. And we always had to hurry him up. But we'd get there and then we'd get into some old jeans and shoes and a shirt, and we'd go out in Thin Beach or we'd go on Top Beach still. It got dark, and those times, of course, it was all standard time. So by 5:30, 6 o'clock, it was already getting dark, and sometimes we didn't shut down. You're out in the middle of a beet field at 5:30, 5:45, 6 o'clock, and you got to finish the row. You're out there until it's dark, and then we'd get to go home and eat. It was an interesting life. You know, you learned to work, and all the money we made, well, went to my mom. When I was in high school, we all worked at the grain elevator. My dad was a foreman there, and my brother Dave and I and my brother Phil all worked there, my brother Frank. And I can remember on Saturday nights when we got paid, I can remember when we started working there, we made 60 cents an hour. And we'd work at like 8 in the morning till 6 at night. When we got paid on Saturday night and we got home with a check, Mom just stood at the doorway there and we just handed her the checks, and including my dad. But you know, when you have 12 kids in the family and you got to feed 12 kids, wintertime, Dad was the only one working. I can remember his take-home pay was maybe after taxes was like $48 a week. But we always had clothes to go to school. Mom would always give us the 25 cents for lunch. Interesting, when we got in junior high and high school, if lunch was 25 cents and you had 5 days a week, you know, you'd give you about $1.25. So she'd give us maybe $1.25 or $1.50, and she'd give it all to you at one time. She says, there's your money. If you spend it all at one time, that's your problem. That's the way we got along. Going back to talking about Rudy, I went to junior high and played football for him, and in that days we played the single wing. So I was a single wing center. Then I went to high school and played football for a guy named Bob Kula and a guy named Pete D'Amato, who was a head baseball coach, but he was assistant football. And I mentioned Pete because when I graduated to go to college, Pete D'Amato had gone down and sent them film on me playing at the high school level, and I didn't know that. One of my college coaches, a guy named Bud Best, Warren Bud Best, was one of the defensive backfield coaches and the running back coach or something up there. And he came to my house. I can remember the conversation. He came in, he said, well, we want Richard to play football for us. I didn't know that he had sent film up there, but my coach had sent film up there, and they said, we saw enough of him. Interesting enough, my father was a foreman at the elevator, said, no, he says, he already has a full-time job when he graduates, you know. And I can remember my mom's conversation with him because she only went to the 5th grade, and she was sitting there and she says, no, Richard's going to go to college. She says, I don't want to hear another word about him going to work at the elevator. And God bless my mother. She stood up and said, no, he needs to go to college. And I was the first one in my family out of the 12 kids to go to college. I wasn't the oldest. My older brother, Dave, he graduated a year before I did from Central or Greeley High. But he went to the Air Force and came out. And then he got a scholarship to go to the college, and he got his bachelor's there, and then he got an invite to go to law school at Denver University on some kind of a scholarship, and he went to DU for 2 years. He ended up working the Department of Labor and Employment for Colorado, and he did a lot of the legal work for him, migrant farm workers' rights. He did a lot of that for him. It was interesting when my mom's conversation with the recruiter, and They wanted me to go play there, and I an offer to maybe go to CSU at that time. And a couple of my buddies I played with, they had been contacted by CU. I didn't have my own car at that time, and the only car we had was my older brother. I did get it when he went to the Air Force. I got to get his car. I went, and they offered me to go to play football at college, and all my tuition was paid for. It was like a full ride, and you had to make the team, number one. Number two, you had to maintain a C average on a quarterly basis, because we were on the quarter system then. And if you didn't maintain a C average, they just took it away and gave it to somebody else. And there you were, you had to pay. My student fees were $25 a quarter that I had to pay. I paid $100 a year to go to Colorado State College and get my bachelor's degree. I got my master's there because teaching and coaching job in Greeley gave you tuition waivers. The school district did for take classes and at night to work on your other degree if you wanted. And in the summer you could get 15 quarter hours paid for by the school district because they took in a lot of student teachers. And so that was a way of paying back. Got my master's, didn't cost me anything other than student fees. I told my coach, I don't know, I can play college football because I weighed 169 pounds my senior year as a center and linebacker for Greeley High School. And I played baseball, and the baseball coach wanted me to play baseball for him at the college. But the football team gave me that really good scholarship type of thing. Baseball didn't have a lot of money, and he said, well, I've got these key players that get, their scholarships. Pete Butler from Butler Hancock, he was one of my professors, and John Hancock was one of my professors. And they used to say things like, talk to coach and maybe football will let you play baseball in the spring. And my football coach, Joe Lindahl, would say, well, tell Coach Butler if he wants to pick up half of your tuition, I'd be glad to do it. Didn't have Division II in those days. We were called intermediate colleges at that time. That's what they called us. Made all conference center a couple of years, and I ended up being selected as an intermediate college All-American, and I always wondered what that really meant. We had a pretty good sized squad. Out of my 4 seasons, we had 3 winning seasons. My freshman year, my sophomore year, and my junior year. We had teams in our conference like Western State, Adams State University now, New Mexico Highlands, play Oklahoma Panhandle, College in Iowa, South Dakota State, South Dakota University, Idaho State, and some non-league games. I was the only freshman on the traveling squad, and I got to go with a team to San Luis Obispo in California and play Cal Poly Tech, whipped our pants pretty good, 25-6. A big kid named Frank Inyard, and he was blocking this big middle guard named Gonzalez. And Gonzalez, we thought he was one of our backs because he was in our backfield most of the time during that ball game. We traveled most of the time by bus. When we went to Idaho, we took a train. We'd catch a train out of Cheyenne, Wyoming called the Portland Rose, and it'd take us all the way into Idaho to where we were going to play. And on the way back, we'd catch that same train, but it was a sleeper. And we'd leave at night, made us stop at every milk stop across the state of Idaho and Wyoming and Colorado. Come all the way into Greeley, and get into Greeley about 5, 6 in the morning. Well, we had a good time. I mean, the rest of the time was by trailway bus or Greyhound. I can still remember our bus driver because we got to know him so well. His name was Harley, and Harley took us all over. Played Wolfpack in Nevada at the Reno. We played them, and we did take a plane ride. I was scared to death the first time I got on an airplane because I'd never been on one. I had never been on a train. And of course I'd been on a bus because we went to high school bus to travel to Loveland and Fort Collins and Longmont and places like that. We played at Jackson Field. Jackson Field, we had pretty good crowds all the time. They had bleachers on both ends where the goalposts are, and they were always pretty full. I can remember we didn't have very many. Just when I was a senior, we played Idaho State here in Greeley. They were ranked number 2 in the intermediate college at that time across the country. My senior year, we only had 3 lettermen. Myself, a guard, a guy named Van Pelt, Jim Bibby, who actually ended up teaching in Greeley and then at Fort Collins. He was one of our tackles, and a guy named Henry Morgan out of Colorado Springs. And Henry was a fine running back for us. And that year, we were 1 win and 9 losses. And the 9 losses, we never lost lost a game by more than 7 to 10 points. We lost game like 14 to 13, 7 to nothing. So we're playing Idaho State. It was about 15 above zero at Jackson Field. I think the only ones in the crowd was my wife, my brother, and that. It was really cold. The band instruments froze for the band, so they couldn't play. They were ranked number 2, and we beat them. We beat them 7 to nothing. That was the only win we had that year. But we had pretty good teams. My other years, the year we were 5-3-1 because we played only 9 games. Another time we were 7-3 my sophomore year. My junior year we won 6, lost 3, and tied 1. We were okay. Don't want to sound like I'm blowing my own horn, but I was very successful in football and baseball, and we were state champions in 1957. My sophomore year we played Rangel, and they beat us. And then the next year we went all the way through, and my baseball coach was Pete D'Amato, and we won the Northern Conference, won the state championship that year. We beat South Denver here at Jackson Field. All the state games were played at Jackson Field and the Bear Stadium there, so we beat South Denver. I was a utility player for them because I played Legion Ball, and D'Amato needed a catcher. I'd catch. I played left field most of the time. I played third base once in a while, so I could move around. When we won the state championship, a kid named Don Martin was our second baseman, and in the final game he got hurt, and I'd play in left field. In the final game, coach came up to me and says, "You know, you're going to have to play second base today." I said, "Oh," and he says, "Don's hurt and he won't be able to go." I said, "Okay, I'll play second base." I had 3 good shots behind second base, and I stopped them all and threw the guy out and all that. And when they selected the All-State baseball team, I was on the All-State baseball team as a second baseman, and the only game I played all season. So it wasn't too bad. But when I got to Central in March of '62, I got a teaching job there. They gave me a contract, and one of my first jobs was they sent me to Park Elementary School, which is now Billy Martinez, taught physical education. Taught down there for a couple of years, and Pete D'Amato was my baseball coach in high school. Said, "I want to get you on the football staff." So I volunteered for football and baseball, especially 63-64 season. Then in '65, they got me a coaching job up there, and I was assistant football, assistant wrestling, and baseball. And then when Pete retired, they wanted to transfer him to Heath Junior High as a principal from the high school, and he was a coach then, but they wanted to make him a principal at Heath. Sometimes you have to think how you're going to meet adversity, especially if you're Latino and all that. But I can remember I was an assistant football coach, and a guy named Gene Warden was a head football coach up here. And in 1967, he got fired, and so his job was open, and I applied for the head football job. And I can remember there was a committee of people downtown. A couple of them knew me very well. But one of the assistants that I coached football with, and he was my assistant baseball coach later on, a guy named Leonard Veriano, was now at Heath, and he called me one day. He says, his buddies called me, he said, "You know, I don't think Rich is going to get that head football job." Leonard said, "Well, how come, do you know?" And the guy said, "Well, the AD who was heading up the committee downtown said, I don't think Greeley's ready for a Mexican head coach." So I didn't get the job. 1967. I hung around, and I was assistant for Pete D'Amato. And in '69, he was going to go to Heath. '68, '69. We were pretty good. We were conference champs that year, Pete's last year. He told me he would go to Heath, but only if I got the head baseball job, because I'd been his assistant since '65. By hook or crook, they gave me the head baseball job. I know that there was a few of them up there that probably said, he'll fall flat on his face, you know. You can't think that way when they put you at the head of the table. My first season at Central and the conference were 17-1-1. We had 1 loss, and we had a tie with Arvada West because it started snowing and we were tied in the 4th inning. So they called it a tie, no game. I was happy with my coaching up there. We won the Northern Conference. My first 2 years there in the Northern Conference, we were 27-1 at Central High School. We had good baseball players. When you have good talent as a head coach, you just say, "This is what we're going to do today, boys." And the guys are mature enough in high school, and they're motivated enough. They just do it on their own. They always try to pat the coach on the back, say, "Good job, coach," but I give all the credit to my ball players. They were wonderful, really good people. I got offered to be the assistant principal there in 1973-74 school year. Good friend of mine that I know from the State Department asked me if there was a position at the State Department of Education and if I would apply for it. I applied for it and I got it. The state personnel director up there called me and says, "Do you still want to work at the Department of Education?" I said, "Sure." And he said, well, the state board hired you last night. 12 and a half years in Greeley 6. And then I went there and I told my wife, maybe I'll go up there, spend a couple of years, and then get a superintendent's job somewhere. 2 years turned into 10, and 10 turned into 20. I ended up staying at the Department of Education for 20 years. I had different positions up there with the Department of Ed. And 94, the guy that used to be the superintendent in Greeley, Tim Waters, was now the director of the Ed Continental Regional Educational Lab, and he offered me a job as a consultant out there, more a consultant. You had to produce products. I said, "Sure, I'll take the job." I went up there. They do publications nationally. They wanted me to do some more work with minority students, Mexicanos. I ended up connecting with a guy named Bill Vansberg that had worked in District 6, and he was a grant writer, a very knowledgeable kind of guy, and he had a doctorate in statistics. We teamed up, put out a few products, called it a Snapshot assessment system. And somebody always asked me, "Well, how did you come up with a Snapshot assessment system?" I said, "Well, when I was a summer school principal for migrant ed, for the migrant program in School District 6. The biggest thing I heard from my teachers that were working in the summer program over at East Memorial, and we had a lot of migrant kids there. At one time, our student population there for the summer 10-week program was 500 kids, migrant kids from preschool to high school students. The biggest thing I would hear from my teachers is, I don't know where these kids are academically. I don't know where they know in that language arts, or I don't know what they know in math or science, because they come in and some of them stay 3 days and move on with the family because they're moving around doing the farm labor. Or the familia finds another job down the road and is gone in a week or 2 weeks, and they didn't know how to place them immediately and get them started and doing something productive in the classroom. And I said to myself, if you have a Polaroid camera and you take a snapshot of somebody, you don't have to wait till that's developed at someplace. Here it comes out on the other end, and you know exactly what somebody looks like. And I said to myself, what if we did a snapshot and we could put something in real short terms in reading, writing, language arts, science, math. And I've thought about my grade school experience. When I started school, we only spoke Spanish. The first 5 or 6 in my family only spoke Spanish. And interesting enough, years later, I found out my mom and dad both spoke English. But because the abuelitos, the grandparents, were always around the house, or somewhere, out of respect for your grandparents, you only spoke Spanish because that's all they understood. And so you don't learn the English language right away. But then you learn it to find out later. Mom and Dad always spoke English. To grade school, I thought back when I was thinking of this project, I said, I can remember when the teacher would put something up on the board and put a word up there and say, "What is this word?" Well, I didn't know what that word was, but when she put a picture with it, and she would say, "What is this?" and I could hear the other kids, "Oh, that's a cat. Oh, that's a dog." When she'd ask me sometimes, "Well, Richard, what is this word up here?" and I could see the dog. "Oh, dog," because I memorized what the kids said, So I thought to myself, if a snapshot was like that, we put it in form where kids look at it, and then you have the word cat in English, and right below it have the same picture of a cat and say gato. My son Michael taught Spanish at Central High School. I had him phonetically sound those words out and put them in phonetics for the teachers. So that the teachers of monolingual English, they could sound it out, gato, and break it down, that word, or escuela, or whatever the word was, and broke it down phonetically. It wasn't spelled exactly like you would spell it in Spanish, but phonetically it sounds like it. And so the teachers even told me at the end of the summer, we learned a lot of Spanish, even know how to read it and speak some of it because of the phonetics in there. The migrant children were monolingual Spanish speakers more than English, could read that and know what it was. And immediately the teacher could give them problems in math or something in language arts or in science, and and they could pick it up, and right away the teachers would say, I know pretty much where this kid is, because if they give them something and they can't do it in either language very well, but give them an easier problem. And amazing, kids did very well with it. And that's how the Snapshot assessment came about. And I did that when I worked at the lab, and they sold them, and there's copies of it. And I did 3 versions of it, first through 4th grade, then I did a middle school version, 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, junior high version of 8th and 9th grade level, and then I did a high school level, and then I actually did an adult prize of all those things, and want to learn how to read or write or even speak some. Their educational level might be 2nd or 3rd grade or 4th grade, so we did the same thing, and I called that Pasos Primeros, first step. And I did that for the National Research Lab and for my own company, because when I left the lab in 98 in December, I went ahead and started my own corporation, Educational Research and Training Corporation, in 1999, and I ran it till December of 2020, 21 years, and my business partner and I closed it down, and I had contracts with approximately 24 states across the country by that time. I started with 4 states, and it grew to 24 states, and I had turned 81 in December, and I said, that's long enough, 58 years in public education. And you want to be involved in, especially with the Latino population, the families, parents. I talked to a lot of parents. You had to tell them the importance of getting an education. Sometimes it's difficult for parents because they didn't go. They think, well, the easy way out, and especially a big family, kids become a working unit in the family. You're not just a kid that's there to eat and sleep. You become a working unit. And I can remember us as a big family. We were a working unit because we all brought money home. Sitting beats to work in the grain elevator. I worked in a grain elevator till I finished my master's in 1965. I got married when I was a sophomore in college, 19 years old, going to be 20, and my wife was a senior at Greeley High. God bless her. She was a love of my life. She right around 54 years, and I had boys, and my 3 sons are all successful educators. One was a teacher and a coach, and ended up being a superintendent before he retired. And one was a Spanish teacher at Central High School for like 27 years, very successful, and he did all the translations for my product. Of course, I paid him like a professional. My youngest son taught and coached at Central High School. Very successful wrestler at the University of Northern Colorado. He was a very good wrestler there, and actually went to the NCAA Nationals when he was a freshman at 142 pounds. And my son Mark, my oldest son Don, wrestled in high school, and he went to state at 119. Now he tells me, Dad, my left leg weighs at 119. They were all very successful, and not only in their profession, but they were good students and good athletes. So my son Michael was a good gymnast. He was all around in gymnastics. He went to state for the Wildcats 2 years in a row. He was quite a gymnast. Oh, I think it's really important, because still have to see some of my ball players that I coached. I can still remember, and I'll mention his name. His name is Ernie Tan. I started coaching Ernie when he was 15 years old at Central. Ernie Tan just turned 72 this last year. Ernie was my heavyweight wrestler, and he played tackle for me for football. I had to wrestle Ernie almost every night for 3 years because I was a heavier one of the 2 wrestling coaches, and I weighed about 190 pounds. He weighed about 265, and Ernie, every Thursday we'd weigh in for matches, and I tell him, by Thursday when we have weigh-in, Ernie, I'd like to have you at maybe down to 235, 240. Oh yeah, Coach, I'll get there. His weigh-ins 265. And you had a weight limit, and that was even for heavyweights in those days. You couldn't go over 275 or something like that. But Ernie played football for me, and I still see Ernie. We go to lunch once in a while. He's had some back surgery lately, but kept contact all these years, and I call him about once a week, and he had back surgery. I always call him, see how he's doing. Another kid named Dave Andre was a catcher for me, and he was our football quarterback. I see Dave every now and then. Kids like that I coached and encouraged, I've always told my kids, you always have to imagine that you can do better than you're doing. You can always do better than you're doing, and if you give it your best and you fail, there's nothing wrong with failing, because that's where we learn what we did wrong and then do it right the next time. A lot of people think it's a big tragedy to fail. Failing is something as your best teacher, because it teaches you, well, I don't want to do that again, Yesterday's gone and tomorrow's not here. Important part of your life right now is today. You got to live today for today, because you don't know know if you're going to be here tomorrow. You know, you got to approach life that way. You got to approach your job that way. Give it your best every day in defense of all the Latinos and Mexicanos and whatever you want to call yourself. So when I was growing up, I used to tell them that I was a Mexican American because that's what my dad used to tell me. You were born in America and you're Mexican descent, you know. Try your hardest. Sometimes you have to do things twice as good than somebody else to get the same position. You have to work twice as hard to keep that position. When you get out there, don't ever think that anybody owes you anything. Anything you have, you earn. And sometimes when working hard like that, there's somebody else that's going to come along and say, I appreciate how you work, I appreciate what you do, and this is what we're going to do for you. But not because you went asking for it or begging for it. You work hard and it'll show up. You know, I've been very lucky. I've never been in a hospital in my life. I wasn't even born in one. I was born at home. The first 6 in my family were born at home. Our doctor was Dr. White. My dad delivered one of my brothers because the Dr. White didn't get there in time. Delivered my brother Frank, and my dad says, oh yeah, he came late, so I delivered him. And I have him there. He comes in and puts a few drops of something in his eyes, gives him a swat on the behind, see if he's crying okay, and then he says, oh yeah, everything's just fine. Then he sends me a bill for $75. He says, he should have sent me $75 for delivering for him. I was in the emergency room a few times when I was in college because I have 3 broken noses and I lost 7 teeth. I lost 4 molars in one night. We only had 1 bar in our helmets. We wore no mouthpieces in those days. Lucky to say they make partials and dentures now that look like your real teeth. I hit this running back on the sideline, and he was going about 100 miles an hour, and I was going 110, and I got him down. I didn't think anything about it. And the next week, we were going to play Adams State College. I feel something coming up my gum. I reached in there, and half a tooth came out. They broke the long way, not across. Each molar came out in 2 pieces. And so Jackson Field over here has 4 molars and a total of 8 pieces out there in the end zone somewhere. Yeah, I lost that, and then I lost 2 front teeth on a tackle and a kickoff. Dennis put a bridge in there I had 2 good teeth, so he bridged a good tooth to a false tooth and a good tooth to a false tooth. And so I had my false teeth in front there for a long time. And I can tell you a short story. It's just a short history ago. About 6 months ago, I was eating a piece of corn on the cob, and my dentist had told me, you know, you got 1 front tooth that's there, looks like it's decayed, and one of these days it's going to break off. It hadn't been more than a month that he told me that when I had gone to see him. They snapped. I tell everybody, not everybody is going to be 39 years old has got these beautiful dentures in their mouth. I had kids that lived with us, kids that were my brother's buddies that we took in. I can remember this one young man. His mom had passed away and he had no dad, and he had 2 older brothers. One was in the Air Force. He just lived down the street here from us, about 2 blocks, 3 blocks. He asked my brother, could I come over to live with your dad? My younger brother, he's passed away now. He played football and wrestled for me at Central. And not only that, my brother Ralph I had as a student in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade down at Park Elementary. So I had my own brother down there, and then I had him as a student at the high school. Him and Tom were real good friends, and Tom asked him, so Tom came to live with us for about 3 years, junior, senior year, and his freshman year in college. Housed him downstairs in the room. He got a job at Ranch Wholesale, now it's something else, and they was fixing the tractor tire, and he was a pretty good baseball player. He's fixing the tractor tire, and rim came off when he was filling it up. Put him in the hospital, a St. Joseph Hospital in Denver for quite a while. My wife would go up and take care of him. And he came home, and we got a hospital bed for him, one of the rooms up here, and he stayed with me. My wife doctored him back. He had 1 eye missing, take 1 eye out. She'd have to change the gauze inside his eyeball every day, keep it clean. And God bless my wife. She was a wonderful little lady. She was 5 foot tall and weighed about 105 pounds at one time, but she was 10 foot tall to most of the kids I brought home. I can remember this other kid, my oldest son, Don's friend. He came over in 7th grade, and I'd like to stay with you, overnight. I thought he said overnight, and my son, Don, Gene would like to stay with us for overnight. I said, yeah, it's okay, he can stay over. So Gene came over. He had a paper sack with some clothes in it, and Gene stayed with us for 3 years in high school. We took him to McCook Junior College to Russell when he graduated. His mom lived in town and no husband, and he had other brothers. We never asked any questions. I treated him like one of my sons. He knew the house rules, and that's the way it was. You do that, and you get paid back in satisfaction that you helped somebody to do the right thing. Also teach him some things about having a dad. Even though you're not their father, you teach them something about being a father, and they're married now and they all have kids, and it's wonderful. That's a good experience. And we went by and my wife says, that's a house I want. So we can't afford that house. Next month we were moving in here, and that was in May 29th, 1967 we moved in here. So we lived here 55 years. It was really costly too. You know, when we moved in here, this house cost me $17,200. And now it's probably worth $480,000. Brick home was built in 1930. Solid walls. There's no sheetrock in these walls. It's all plaster. There's that thick. They have wire and everything, poured cement in there. We took when we were in Gill, Colorado, where I was born. This my older brother Dave was in here. He passed away last December, and that's me right there. My mom bought the jeans at the same time as the tennis shoes, but his shoes always really immaculate, and mine were all tore up. I don't think I had shoestrings in those. My sister Isabel, who lives in North Carolina, she was the second oldest of the girls in my family. And then my brother Phil actually still lives in Loveland. And he worked at Ames Community College at one point and taught Spanish. Brother Frank, who's passed away. So that's 5 of the 12 kids that were in our family. We just happened to be there together, and this building there where my grandma Gonzalez lived, and right next to it was a church, a Spanish Assembly of God church that was on their property. Everybody went to church there in Gill, Colorado. That's my brother Dave. Sister Gina was the oldest. Gina would be 85 years old now. She passed away when she was 64. And my brother Dave passed away last year. He was 83. And that's me. That good-looking guy right there, Richard. My brother Phil, who lives in Loveland. Yeah, that license plate says 1942 on it. All-American certificate that was given to me by the college. I don't even know if that Williamson's National Football Rating System's in effect anymore, but it was selected as a center for Colorado State College Bears in fall of 1961. Interesting about the certificate, I graduated in June of 62 with my bachelor's, and they gave me this certificate. The guy that did the publicity for the college said, I want you to have this because it was misplaced. We just found it, so we want you to have it. None of my coaches or anybody knew that I'd made this team. A couple of my buddies up there tried to have them induct me into the Football Hall of Fame up there, but that never happened. I'm satisfied that I did it, I earned it. And at the same time, that year, I got invited to spring training camp for the Dallas Texans as a linebacker, who are now the Kansas City Chiefs. Lamar Hunt owned the Dallas Texans, and he moved the club to Kansas City. Yeah, they asked me to go try out at their camp. It was interesting. They said, if you go, you make the team, we'll reimburse you for your expenses coming down here, and we'll reimburse your expenses for going back home. If we don't select you at our training camp to stay, you have to pay for your own expenses. Make the team, start out at $4,500 a year. I know that Dick Butkus at that time was making about $7,200 for the Chicago Bears. Came home and told my wife that I go and I make the team, it's $4,500. She says, wait a minute, dear, that's a no-brainer. She says, well, you go try out and you don't make it, you're giving up. You already got a teaching and coaching job in Greeley, and you got a contract for $4,500 for teaching, and they give you $350 for coaching. You're gonna make $4,850. And she said, that's a no-brainer, trading that for $4,500. I don't think that's a good deal. All-conference picture, and then my All-American picture in the fall of 1961. Selected as an all-conference center for the Bears at that time. And here is my wife and I when we got married. It was one of the best things I ever did, marrying that young lady. She was born in Lincoln, Nebraska, and most of the time she grew up in Grand Island. But she came to Greeley when she was a 9th grader. My wife passed away about 12 years ago, but her sister that they brought over here is still alive. Her sister Nancy just turned 75. I see Nancy, and Nancy's husband I taught in elementary school. We were youngsters just learning what life was all about. Somebody said it was a mistake getting married that young. It was the best mistake I ever made. My graduation picture in 58. And that's my wife, Betty, when she was a sophomore. Short haircut, and I loved the flat tops. That was something that you just did in those days, the old flat tops. My kids loved them. They can all tell you that they hated it when I said we were going to the barber, especially when they got in junior high and high school. Oh, we don't want to go to your barber. All he does is get flat tops. When I worked at the National Research Lab, I did this was my first publication, myself and my business partner, Bill Basberg. And we did this when this was first through third grade. That's where the Snapshot assessment came in that I talked about. Later on, and years later, I was at a lab for almost 5 years. I did this Spousals 912, and that was for high school students, 9th grade to 12th grade. The reason I did these was I did the Snapshot assessment system for 1 to 3, and then 4, 5, and 6, and then a middle school 7 and 8. But then the lab said they weren't going to get any more money to do the high school version. They said they didn't know if there was a need for a bilingual product at the high school level. And so at that point I decided I'll leave the lab, and I started my own corporation, Educational Research and Training Corporation. February of 1999, we had 4 states under contract, and I talked to them and I said, you guys want to go with me? I'm not going to do a high school version, so if you want that, you can go with my company. And they said, okay. And so they transferred their money from the lab that was going to develop this and give it to my corporation, and started with 4 states. By the time we did the 9th grade level on up, and then we did the adult, and then we did individual ones for reading, for math, and different assessments in both languages. And like I said, my son Michael did all the translations on these. 21 years I ran Educational Research and Training Corporation. Started in January of 1999 when I applied for incorporated papers with the Secretary of State in Denver. I closed the company down in December 31st of 2020. I was taken up here at Glenmere. My family picture was my wife and myself, my brother Dave that passed away, and my kids, grandkids. I wanted to start the Boys Club in there, and it was right there on 11th Avenue. And I got on the board of directors, and then we said, State Army on 8th Avenue and about 6th Avenue there on the corner, close to it, the Boys Club, we got to move over there. I was on the board of directors that time, and we had wanted to build a boys club over here where Madison Elementary School is. And the board of directors, I think there was 5 of us on the board, 6 of us, and said, how do we do this? Went on to see if we could get donations. I can remember myself, I put my house up for collateral, and some of the other guys did too. Came home and told my wife, but this is what I just did. I put the house up for collateral to get a loan to build a boys club. And that's how we built the boys club. And then, of course, it ended up building that, and then they moved to the other side of town too, and they have a boys and girls club, which is a thing. It should have happened a long time before that, but we were starting to get ahead of the game of including the girls, because that's a big membership. And that's how the boys club got moved from the 11th Avenue, where the liquor stores were, not far from Island Grove, on this side of Island Grove, to the State Army, to up there by Madison. So I was involved with that.